The needle went through the silk the way it had gone through 10,000 mornings before it, without a sound, without a tremble, drawing the crimson thread up into the gray light that leaked beneath the door. Feng Meihua sat folded on the plank bench with the wedding quilt spread across her knees, and under her fingers a phoenix was being born, feather by feather, tail first, the way her grandmother had taught her in the village a whole ocean ago, because the tail was where a woman hid her patience. Outside, Coldwater was not yet awake. Inside, the lamp burned low, and the jade at her throat lay cold as creek water against her collarbone. She had begun the quilt for the Halloran girl, who was to marry a freighter come June. The girl had stood in this same doorway 2 weeks past with her mouth pinched, saying she would pay good money for the fine Chinese stitching, but that Meihua was not to speak of it about town, as though the work of her hands were a thing a bride ought to be ashamed to want. Meihua had bowed her head and taken the deposit and said nothing, because a woman with a needle and no country learns early that the mouth earns nothing and the hands earn bread. She split the crimson floss finer than a hair, the way Popo had shown her by candlelight, and laid the couching thread over the phoenix's wing in stitches so small the whole town could scorn them, and none of the town could match them. The boardwalk complained under a heavy step, and then a second, slower, and the light under her door went dark. She lifted her eyes. A man filled the frame of her doorway the way a bull fills a gate, broad through the shoulder, dust to the knee, a hat held in 2 big scarred hands against his chest, as if he had walked into a church, and only now remembered it. He did not knock. He looked at the quilt across her knees, at the half-made phoenix burning red on the white silk, and something moved behind his weathered face and was gone, the way a fish turns once under still water and sinks. "They tell me," he said at last, and his voice came out rusted, unused. "You make quilts." "I make quilts," Meihua answered, and set her needle carefully into the cloth so it would not be lost. He stepped inside. He was too large for the little shop, and he seemed to know it, holding himself in, careful of her shelves of folded cottons and her jars of buttons. From the pocket of his coat he drew something folded soft with handling, and laid it on her cutting table, the way another man might lay down a wounded bird. It was a scrap of quilt no bigger than a supper plate, worn near to gauze, the cotton faded and the batting gone flat and gray, a corner of some larger thing cut away. Half of a pieced star sat on it, unfinished, the last seam still holding a rusted needle someone had left mid-stitch and never come back to draw through. Behind him, small in the wide light of the street, a child's face had come to the window glass and pressed there, pale as a moon, watching. Meihua's breath went still in her chest. She did not touch the scrap. She looked at the man and at the little face at the glass, and she understood without a word being spoken that whatever this thing was, it was not a thing a person paid money for, and that he had come to her because in a whole town of women who would not be seen buying from her, she was the only one who would not ask him why. "I want one made," the man said, and his jaw worked once beneath the brim shadow. Whole, finished. And Meihua, who had crossed an ocean to bury a husband she never got to bury, felt the cold jade warm 1 degree against her throat, and did not yet know why. His name was Silas Merritt, and by the time the sun had cleared the false fronts across the street, she had learned only that much, because he was a man who spent words the way a miser spends coin. He gave her the name, the direction of his ranch out past the North Fork, and the fact that the child at the window was his daughter, called Etta, then stood turning his hat, unable to say the rest. So Meihua said it for him with her hands. Without asking leave, she spread the ruined scrap flat on her table and read it the way she read all cloth, by the grain and the wear and the thread. It had been pieced by a right-handed woman who worked in the evenings, she could tell, for the tension pulled tight where a tired hand pulls at the end of a long day. It had been meant to be large, a marriage quilt, the kind a woman makes for a wedding that has not happened yet. And it had been stopped, not worn out, but stopped, cut off mid-life, the needle still in it. "Your wife," Meihua said quietly, not a question. The man did not answer, which was answer enough. At the window, the little girl breathed a flower of fog on the glass and traced it with 1 finger and did not smile. "She was making it," he said finally, each word set down like a stone into a well. "For a wedding, we kept saying we'd have proper, in the church, once the herd was up, once the barn was raised, once the next thing was done. Circuit preacher married us in the yard 3 years back with the hired men for witnesses, and we always said we'd do it right. She was making the quilt for that." He stopped. There wasn't going to be a next winter to wait for. I didn't know that. He told her the rest in as few words as a man can use and still bleed. 2 springs gone, a late blizzard had come down out of the mountains in a single afternoon while he was in town for wire and salt, and it had closed the passes behind him. Ruth had gone out alone to a mare foaling early, and the snow had come between the house and the barn the way a wall comes down. He had ridden home half-blind and found her at the barn door in the morning with the newborn foal alive and warm beside her, and Ruth herself gone cold, one hand still fisted in the straw as if reaching for the latch. Etta had been 3. Etta had not said more than 10 words together since. Meiwa kept her eyes on the cloth while he spoke, because she had learned that a proud man can say the unsayable if you do not look at him while he says it. When he had finished, she let the quiet sit a moment, the way you let a wound breathe before you bind it. I cannot make her quilt, she said gently. That belonged to her hands, and it is finished, though it is not done. If I take it apart to complete it, I will kill what is left of her in it. She lifted her eyes to him then. But I can make a new one, for the child, so that the cold thing she holds at night can be laid to rest, and a warm thing put in its place. A wedding quilt, if that is the word she cut it off at, made the way your wife would have wanted it made, if she'd had the years. Something in the big man's throat moved, and he had to look away, out the door, at nothing. Folks'll talk, he said roughly. Man like me, ordering a wedding quilt off the Chinawoman. There's tongues in this town to make a thing of it. There are tongues in this town, Meiwa said, threading her needle again with steady fingers, that make a thing of my sweeping my own step. Let them. My work has never once cared what a mouth thinks of it. She took up her shears. Bring the child on Thursday, Mr. Merritt, so I can measure her bed and see her face. A quilt is made for a person, not a size. She did not see him smile, because he did not smile. But when he had gone, and the boardwalk had carried his weight away, the small face stayed a moment longer at the window, before it, too, drew back into the brightness of the street, and Meiwa sat holding a needle she had forgotten to use, wondering what color a motherless child dreams in, and whether she had just agreed to something far larger than a quilt. Thursday brought them in a wagon, and it brought half of Coldwater's eyes with it, because a rancher's rig standing outside the Chinese seamstress's door was a thing the town could not let alone. Meiwa felt the looks the way she felt weather, on the skin, the mercantile wife pausing her broom, the men outside the assay office turning their heads, the particular still attention of a young woman in a blue dress across the street who watched the wagon, then watched Meiwa's window, with a coldness that had nothing to do with the season. But inside, there was only the child. Etta Merritt was 6 and small for it, all wrists and watchful eyes, her fair hair braided by a father's clumsy hands, into something that had started even and given up. She came in gripping the ruined scrap of her mother's quilt against her chest, and stood in the middle of the shop like a fawn in a clearing, ready to bolt. Silas took his hat off and did not know what to do with his hands, and Meiwa, who had buried her own baby's shoes before they were ever worn, for she had lost that too, across the water, in a story she told no one, did the only wise thing, which was to ignore the child entirely. She spread cloth, she unrolled a bolt of good unbleached muslin, and a length of turkey red, and a piece of indigo, the blue of a night sky over the sea, and laid them across the table where the light fell, and she began, quietly, to sing. It was a village song, a boat song from the Pearl River Delta, the song the women sang splitting silk in the long evenings when Meiwa was smaller than Etta, and she sang it not for the child, but as if the child were not there at all. It took the length of 2 verses, then a small shadow moved at the edge of the table, and a small finger reached out and touched the turkey red, and a small voice, rusty as her father's, whispered, "That one's the color of the star." They were the first words Meiwa had heard her speak. Behind the child, Silas Merritt went absolutely still, the way a man goes still when a wild thing eats from his hand for the first time. "It is," Meiwa agreed, as though children spoke to her every day of her life. "It is exactly the color of a star, if a star were warm. Would you like to know a secret about it?" And she drew the little girl in by inches, by the color red and the shine of a button, and the strange smooth cool of the jade at her own throat, which Etta at last reached up and touched with one finger, her eyes gone wide. "That is a phoenix," Meiwa told her, "of the carving. A bird made of fire. My grandmother wore it, and her grandmother. When everything else burns, the phoenix does not die. It goes into the fire and it comes out again, new. She let the child hold the small green weight of it in her palm. "I put a phoenix in every quilt I make, so that whoever sleeps under it, no matter how cold the winter, will remember they are the kind of thing that comes back." Etta did not smile. But she did not let go of the jade, and she did not once, all that morning, let go of Meiwa's sleeve. And by the time the light had swung around to noon, the little girl was sitting in the seamstress's lap, being shown how to push a threaded needle up through cloth and catch it and pull it down again. Her tongue caught between her teeth, a wobbling line of red running crooked across a scrap of muslin, like the track of a small brave animal across snow. Over her fair head, Meiwa's eyes met the father's. He was looking at his daughter's hands, and then at Meiwa's, at the way her long fingers cradled the small ones and guided them, patient and certain, and whatever he had walked in that door carrying had shifted its weight, and he did not seem to know how to carry it now. He looked away too late, the tips of his ears gone red above his collar, and Meiwa bent her face quickly to the child, so he would not see that she had seen. Outside, across the street, the young woman in the blue dress was still watching the window, and had not moved, and did not move even when Meiwa lifted her eyes to it, only held her gaze, cool and level, and full of a knowledge Meiwa did not yet have, before turning at last and walking away up the boardwalk with her chin high, and leaving the seamstress with the strange cold certainty that she had, without knowing it, taken something that another woman had already decided was hers. The quilt grew through the long green weeks of that spring, and so, without either of them naming it, did the thing between the ranch and the shop. Silas Merritt found reasons. A man who had come once and hated it, now came twice a week, and could not have told you why. He brought Etta for fittings long after there was any fitting left to do. He brought a haunch of venison wrapped in cheesecloth and set it on her table gruff, mumbling it would spoil out at the ranch, and Meiwa, who had eaten thin for 3 winters, understood that a proud man cannot give charity, but he can waste meat on purpose. She fed them both at the little table behind her shop, rice and greens and a broth she made with dried things sent up from the San Francisco herbalist. And the first time Silas tasted it, he stopped with the bowl at his mouth and looked at her over the rim, like a man who had forgotten food could taste of somewhere. She learned him slowly, the way you gentle a hard-mouthed horse, by never grabbing. That he read his Bible by the fire but had quarreled with the God in it since the blizzard. That he had come west from Tennessee with nothing and built the M-Bar out of borrowed money and stubbornness, that he owed the bank and owed the Ashbys, and that Horace Ashby, who owned the water rights on the whole North Fork and half the valley besides, had made it plain the debt would be forgiven the day Silas married Ashby's daughter Cordelia and made the 2 ranches one. That was the young woman in the blue dress. Meiwa understood it all at once, the cool watching eyes, the certainty, the thing already decided. Cordelia Ashby had been raised to believe the M-Bar and its widower were as good as banked, waiting only on a decent interval of grief. And she had watched that grief begin, against all sense, to thaw in the wrong direction, toward the wrong door, in the hands of the wrong woman. A woman who did not even count, in Coldwater's ledger, as a woman a man like Silas Merritt could want. Meiwa told herself it was nothing to her. She was a widow with a needle. She had learned in the worst year of her life, the year the ocean gave her nothing back, that to want a thing was to hand the world a stick to beat you with. She had crossed the water at 19 to marry a good quiet man named Lai Ah-chung, whom she had known since they were children pulling reeds by the river, and crossed it again, alone, when the letter came that a Sierra tunnel had gone up before its time and taken 12 Chinese men and left no bodies whole enough to send home. She had come to collect his bones and his wages, and been given neither, cheated by the company and by her own countrymen both, and had washed up in cold water with a jade phoenix, a pair of shears, and her grandmother's stitches in her fingers. She did not let herself want. Wanting was a country she had left. And yet, on a warm evening in the last week of May, she rode out to the M-Bar in the herbalist's borrowed cart to deliver the finished quilt top before she quilted it down. She stood with him on the porch of the log house in the gold last light while Etta slept inside, the whole valley below them turning the color of the phoenix at her throat, and Silas Merritt said, without looking at her, in the voice of a man forcing his own hand, "Ruth would have liked you." Meiwa's fingers went still on the cloth. "She'd have set you down at that table," he went on, low, rough, "and made you talk till midnight, and laughed at all my quiet, and told you things about me I'd not want told." His jaw tightened under the shadow of his hat. "I loved her 12 years. I thought when she went, that the wanting part of me went in the ground with her. I made my peace with being a man who was done. He turned his head then and looked at her full, and there was something in his weathered face torn open and afraid of itself. I don't know what I am now. The distance between them on that porch was the width of a folded quilt, and the width of an ocean, and the width of everything cold water would allow. Mei Hua felt his warmth across it like the warmth off a banked fire, and she felt her own heart, that traitor country, open its border a crack, and then she saw the cool, level eyes of Cordelia Ashby, and the debt, and the child asleep inside who had already buried one mother, and she took the thing in her chest and folded it small, the way she folded silk, and stepped back. "The quilt will be ready Friday," she said, and her voice did not shake, though it cost her everything to keep it so. "You should not stand so close to a woman on a porch, Mr. Merritt. In this town, it is enough to hang us both." She saw the words land. She saw him draw back and set his jaw and become again the shut man who had first filled her doorway, and she got up into the cart and drove down out of that gold light with her back straight and her hands steady on the reins, and her face wet only after the ranch was lost behind the cottonwoods, and there was no one in all the darkening valley to see it but the first hard stars. The war came, as such wars do, dressed as concern. It began small, the way frost begins. The Halloran girl came for her wedding quilt and paid for it and would not meet Mei Hua's eyes and let slip, flustered, that folks were saying things, that a decent bride oughtn't have Chinese hands on her marriage bed, that Miss Ashby had told the church sewing circle it was unlucky, unclean, that heaven knew what heathen charms got stitched in a language honest folk couldn't read. Mei Hua listened and wrapped the quilt in brown paper and said nothing, and after the girl had gone she stood a long time with her palms flat on her empty table. Then it grew teeth. The next bride did not come at all, nor the next. The order book, never full but always fed, went bare. Ah Suk's laundry 2 doors down found its custom halved, and old Tam the herbalist, who had never harmed a living soul, was told by the mercantile it would no longer sell him lamp oil. The message ran clear as a brand through the crooked little end of the street where the red lanterns hung. The town could not put the Chinese out by law that season, but it could starve them thin, and the starving would begin with the woman who had forgotten her place badly enough to make a widower's daughter smile. Mei Hua understood that she was the cause, that Cordelia Ashby had reached past her and struck at everyone standing near her, so that her own people would see the trouble she had brought down on them, and turn from her too, and leave her alone in the middle of the ruin. It was cleverly done. It very nearly worked. She stopped going to the ranch. She sent word by the freighter's boy that the quilt would be finished and delivered, and that Mr. Merritt need not call again. It was not fitting. She sat in her cold shop through the long light evenings, and split silk finer and finer, and told herself she had been a fool to let a porch and a gold sunset make her forget the shape of her life. And then one gray dawn a stone came through her window. It did not come alone. It came in the small hours with a scrawl of tar on the boardwalk, and a word she could not read, but did not need to, and with the frightened faces of Ah Suk and old Tam in her doorway, asking what was to be done. Mei Hua swept the glass into a pan with her hands steady and her heart a stone to match the one on her floor, and thought, clearly and coldly, that it was time to go. There was a woman she knew in the sewing lofts of San Francisco's DuPont Street who would take her in. She could vanish into the great warren of Chinatown where one more widow with a needle was no one's scandal, and leave cold water to close over her as water closes over a dropped stone. Silas could pay his debt and marry his cold blue bride, and Etta would forget the smell of her broth by autumn, and it would be, she told herself, kinder to all of them. She began, that same day, to pack. She was folding the last of her cottons into her one trunk 2 evenings later, when the wagon came tearing up the street. She heard it before she understood it, the horses run near to foundering, the wheels slewing, and then Silas Merritt was in her doorway, and there was no stillness in him now, none, his face gone gray as ash under the trail dust, and his big hands shaking. "Etta's gone," he said, and the words came out of him broken. She heard the men talking. She heard you were leaving. She took her mother's. She took the scrap, and she took a lantern, and she's, Mei Hua, she's out, somewhere on the road, coming to you. It's near dark, and there's men out with drink in them tonight, and my girl is out there alone. He gripped the doorframe as though it were the only thing holding him upright. I've got every hand I own on the North Road. I don't know what I need. I came here. His voice cracked clean through. I came here. Meiwa did not remember reaching for her shawl. She did not remember snatching up the good lantern and the jade going cold and then warm against her throat as her heart began to slam. She remembered only being in the wagon with him, the two of them thrown shoulder to shoulder as the horses tore south out of town, and the dusk coming down purple over the sage, and a child somewhere in all that dark with a broken toy and a cold light, walking toward the one warm place she knew. They found her by the Phoenix. It was full dark by then, and the wind had come up cold off the mountains, and they had shouted themselves hoarse quartering the road, when Meiwa made Silas stop the team and stood up in the bed of the wagon and did the only thing left to her, which was to sing. She sang the boat song, the Pearl River song, the one that had drawn the child out of her silence the first day, throwing it out into the black land verse after verse. And Silas held the lantern high beside her, and for a long, terrible while there was nothing but the wind eating the words. And then, thin and small and off to the west, where the ground fell to the dry creek, a light answered. A little swinging light, and under it a little voice, cracked with crying and cold, taking up the tune the child could not have known the words to and knew anyway, the way you know a lullaby you were sung before you had language, and following it back the way a lost thing follows the smell of home. Etta Merritt came up out of the dry creek scratched and shaking, her lantern near guttered, her mother's ruined scrap of quilt clutched in both fists against her chest, and she did not run to her father. She ran to Meiwa. She hit her at a dead run and buried her face in the seamstress's skirts and howled, all the words she had not said in 3 years, coming loose at once in a flood, and the words she said were, "Don't go, don't go, don't go. If you go, you won't come back. Everybody goes and they don't come back." Meiwa went down on her knees in the cold dirt and gathered the child into her whole body, and over the small heaving shoulders she looked up and found Silas Merritt standing above them both, with the lantern shaking in his fist and the light running gold down a face that had gone entirely undone, unashamed, wet and open in front of her at last, and she knew then, with the child's heart hammering against her own, and the phoenix warm at her throat, that the folding small was over, that she had crossed an ocean twice, to learn that you do not get to choose the door your heart walks out of. You only get to choose whether you are brave enough to follow it through. "I am not going anywhere," she said into the child's hair, but she said it looking up at the father. "Do you hear me, Saimui? Little bird, the phoenix does not run from the fire. I am not going anywhere." They rode back to town in the deep of that night, with the child asleep at last between them, and somewhere past the cottonwoods, without a word, Silas Merritt's rough hand found Meiwa's small cold one on the wagon seat, and closed over it, and did not let go, and neither of them looked at the other, and neither of them let go, all the long dark way home. But the town was awake when they reached it. Word of a rancher and the Chinawoman gone out alone into the night together had run ahead of them on the wind, and there were lamps lit in the mercantile, and men on the boardwalk, and at the head of them, on the church steps where Coldwater settled its heaviest business, stood Horace Ashby with his thumbs in his vest, his daughter pale and rigid at his side, and the particular ugly patience of men who have decided a thing has gone far enough. Meiwa had heard the word mob before, but she had never until that moment felt what it was. The way a crowd stops being people and becomes weather. "That's far enough, Merritt." Ashby's voice carried flat and easy over the street. "We been talking, the decent folk and me. This has gone past a joke. You turn a motherless child against her own people, you make a spectacle of your poor wife's memory not 2 years cold. No, sir. There's a stage south at first light, and she's going to be on it, and you're going to remember which side of your own blood you stand on." He looked at Meiwa then for the first time, and there was nothing in his eyes but a ledger. "Nothing personal, girl. You people are fine in your place. This just ain't it." Meiwa stood in the wagon bed with the sleeping child in her arms, and the whole town's face turned up at her, and she was afraid, more afraid than she had been of the ocean, more afraid than she had been of the empty year. And then she felt Silas Merritt move. He did not shout. She would remember that always. He climbed down from the wagon slow and took his hat off. There in front of the mob, he took his hat off the way he had in her doorway the first morning, as though even this were a kind of church, and stood bareheaded in the lantern light and spoke so quiet that the whole street had to go silent to hear it. And going silent to hear it, they were caught. "Ruth's been on my mind tonight," he said. "More'n she has in a long while." He turned the hat in his hands. "Y'all knew her. You know she never once stood by and watched a decent person get run down by a pack. And if I let you use my dead wife as the reason to break a good woman, then I never knew Ruth at all. And neither did you." He lifted his head. "This woman put my daughter's voice back in her mouth. My Etta spoke tonight, for the first time since the snow took her mama, and the first word she said was 'Don't go. Don't go.'" His voice held, barely. "I've been a widower 2 years, and a coward about the same. I'm done being both." He turned, in front of the hole of cold water, and he looked up at Mei Hua in the wagon, and he said it plain, the way he said everything, with nothing left over. "I want you to stay, Fong Mei Hua. Not in your place. In mine. Beside me. I want to marry you proper, in that church behind those men, with my girl throwing the flowers. And I want that quilt you made on our bed. And I don't give one good goddamn," the word cracked across the square like a shot. "Who in this valley can't abide it? You've been the only warm thing in my house since the cold came. Marry me. Say you'll stay." The street did not breathe, and Mei Hua, standing high in the lantern light with a sleeping child in her arms, and an ocean, and a village, and 2 graves at her back, and a phoenix at her throat, felt the last fold in her come open, slow and sure and final, like a wing. "Do you know," she said, and her voice rang out clear and steady over the hushed street, over Ashby's ledger face and Cordelia's white one, over the men with drink in them, and the decent folk gone suddenly ashamed. "What my grandmother told me, when she taught me the stitch that holds a phoenix down," she said. "We do not sow the bird so it will lie still. We sow it so that when the house burns, it will be the one thing that flies out whole." She looked down into the ruined face of the man who had taken off his hat for her. "I have crossed the water twice. I have buried more than this town will ever know. I did not do all of that to be afraid. On the very last night, I might have to be brave." Her voice gentled, and it was only for him now, though all of Coldwater heard it. "Yes, I will stay. I will marry you in that church, Silas Merritt, with your girl throwing flowers, and I will make us a life so warm the cold will never find its way back in." There was a silence like the top of a held breath. And then Etta Merritt woke, lifted her tousled head from Mei Hua's shoulder, looked out sleep-blurred at all the staring grown people, and said, in a small clear voice that carried to the church steps, "She's going to be my mama now," as though it were the plainest fact in the world and always had been. The thing that broke the mob was not anger and was not the law. It was the doctor's wife who began to cry. It was old Tam and Ah Suk, come down from the lantern end of the street to stand under the wagon, unafraid now. One of their own claimed at last in front of everyone. It was the Halloran girl, pushing forward with her chin up, saying she'd wear a Merritt quilt to her grave and be proud. It was, in the end, the whole ordinary decency of ordinary people, which a jealous woman and a rich man had almost talked into cruelty, remembering itself all at once and turning, leaving Horace Ashby alone on the church steps, with nothing but a debt he could no longer collect, and his daughter already gone up the dark boardwalk with her chin high and her cause lost, and no one, not one soul, following her. They were married in that church 3 Sundays later, when the last of the June light lay long and gold across the valley, and Etta walked ahead scattering wild larkspur from a basket, grave and radiant and wordful, and old Tam played a reed pipe on the steps after, in a tune no one in Coldwater had ever heard, and half the town that had turned its face away came bearing dishes and shame and clumsy kindness, which Mei Hua accepted the way she accepted all cloth, by the grain of it, forgiving the flaws. The quilt lay on their bed that first night, and every night after, the great white field of it, and the phoenix rising red and gold from edge to edge, and worked small and secret into the underside, where only the 2 of them would ever find it. In the finest split silk her grandmother had passed down to her, was a pieced star the color of a warm thing, Ruth's star, finished at last, not torn from the dead but reborn from the living, so that the woman who had begun it slept in the quilt too, and was not left out in the cold. The years came the way years come to a good ranch, in seasons and labor and small deep joys stacked against the winter like cordwood. The M-Bar prospered, freed of Ashby's water once the town remembered its spine. Mei Hua's shop reopened, and this time the brides came in daylight, unashamed, from 3 counties, until a Coldwater wedding without a Fong Mei Hua phoenix on the marriage bed came to seem a poor thin thing, and the same tongues that had once called her stitching unclean called it, in time, the finest work in the territory. A red lantern hung by the ranch house door, lit every evening, a small warmth you could see from the far end of the valley road, so a man riding home in the dark would always know which light was his. 2 more children came, a boy with his father's stillness and a girl with her mother's quick hands, and Etta taught them both the boat song before they could walk, and none of the 3 ever once, in all their lives, wanted for the words to say what they felt. And on an evening many autumns on, Mei-hwa sat on the porch of the log house in the last gold light, with the phoenix jade warm in her hand, worn smoother by another 20 years of a thumb passing over it, and she watched her husband come up from the corral, with their grandchild on his shoulders, gray now, slower now, his hands more scarred and no less gentle, and she remembered a man too large for a little shop, who could not say what he had come for. "Ruth would have liked you," he said, easing himself down beside her on the step. The same words, an old private joke now, worn soft as the quilt. "She does," Mei-hwa answered, as she always answered, and laid her small worn hand over his big worn one, and did not let go, and neither did he, while below them, the whole valley turned the color of a bird made of fire, the color of the thing that goes into the flame and comes out new. So tell me, my friend, as the fire burns low and this story finds its rest, if the whole town had turned its back on you, and the only warm door left was one the world said you had no right to walk through, would you have folded your heart small and slipped away into the safe cold dark, the way Mei-hwa so nearly did? Or would you too have stood up in the lantern light and let yourself be brave one last time? I would dearly love to know. Tell me down in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and who you'd have been on that dark church street. And if this tale of 2 worlds and 1 stubborn, hopeful love warmed you even a little, stay a while by our fire. Subscribe, and let the lantern by the door tell you which stories are yours. There is always another one waiting, and I will keep it lit for you.